The Ant King Meruem made a big mistake. It has nothing to do with Isaac Netero, nothing to do with Gungi, nothing to do with Royal Guard, no. Meruem's cause was doomed to fail long before any of this came into play, and it all has to do with an ant penguin guy named Peggy. So this idea pops up every now and then, and I'm personally a pretty big fan of it, but most recently I saw it posted by Delicious Goose 1002 on the Hunter x Hunter subreddit, and I think it's time to really dive into it. The general hypothesis is that Meruem lost the war against humans the moment that he killed Peggy, which is the very first thing he did after being born. Well, technically second. The first thing he did was demand a feast, but the second thing he did was thwack Peggy's head clean off. But how could this moment possibly be so significant? Well, Peggy is one of my favorite chimera ants, right next to Thug, Panda, and Koala, for very biased Australian-based reasons, but Peggy was the chimera ant who best understood humanity. A lot of the other ants had human instincts, like Colt's innate desire to protect Raina, but none of them could really make sense of those traits the way that Peggy could. You don't get it. Their ability to learn is their strength. Once they find out that the queen is our weakness, they'll come to kill her any way they can. That is an example of Peggy's wonderful insight. And he wanted to make that ability to learn that human strength a reality for the chimera ant as well. And so he spent his time studying humans. Hence why he's always carrying his trusty book, which is actually a reference to his human self. Before being incorporated into anthood, Peggy allegedly always carried around the NGL Bible, which makes it apparent that Peggy carried a lot of human traits into his penguin ant resurrection. He was an incredible asset in the early days of Meruem's colony, because where most chimera ants were on the mindless beast side of things, Peggy had a strong intuition for how to gather and implement information. For example, it was Peggy who insisted that they find Pockle alive to interrogate him rather than kill him on sight, which is a huge moment because interrogating/lobotomizing Pockle is how the ants acquired that advanced knowledge of Nen. Their ability to learn was their strength in that moment, and Peggy believed strongly in structure and order. Really, if he wasn't a penguin, you would mistake Peggy for a human. There were very few instinctual traits of an ant to be found within him. The only one I can really identify is his overprotective nature towards the queen, and ironically, that one ant trait I can identify is what would lead to his death. In chapter 213, when the Ant King Meruem was finally born, the very first act the king committed was killing Peggy. The reason for this being that Meruem made his violent entrance into the world, leaving the queen heavily wounded, and immediately demanded a feast to appease his newborn appetite. However, Peggy sprang into action out of a desire to protect the queen, which triggered Meruem to swipe Peggy's head off. The reason for this being that Peggy had ignored an order from the king, so his human instincts took priority over his ant instincts. Peggy was worried about the queen dying, but that should not have been his primary concern. Now that the king had been born, there was no functional need for the queen, so nature would dictate that her concern should be abandoned in favor of the king and in favor of the colony as a whole, which is probably displayed best through Neferpito. Dr. Blythe put Kite back together so it easily could have saved her life. However, Pito stated, "Once the king is born, the queen doesn't matter to us. We don't need that thing anymore." And from Meruem and the Royal Guard's perspective, look, I get it. Because we empathetic human things watch Peggy and we see him as the victim in this situation. Because we have that ability to feel the heightened emotions that are happening. Peggy cares for the queen. And as a result, we care for Peggy. But newborn Meruem doesn't have that capability. And what he's seeing is a member of his colony disobeying his direct orders. He commanded a feast and Peggy did not that. Peggy may as well have defecated onto Meruem's face because these transgressions are more or less the same in Antworld. Big question now. Have you ever wondered, how does ant sleep? Well, the answer is with the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep, maker of the world's best sleep masks and accessories. Even I use these because without them, I really struggle to nap during the day. Because every tiny sliver of sunlight feels like Isaac Netero summoning a blinding 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva smack bang in the middle of my retina for no good reason. Please stop, sir. So in the office, I use the lovely Manta head strap, which is adjustable to any head and features a wonderful soft cozy lining that gives a near blackout effect so that I can dream about my fictional hunters in peace, which is even better with these Manta cool eye cup accessories. And I also have the really cool Manta Sound, which is a Bluetooth immersive experience. But in all honesty, I really haven't gotten the chance to check this one out, and that's because my wife immediately stole it and has been using it every day since it arrived. But if you'd like to check out what I've been missing, then you can head to my link in the description and use my code to get 10% off your order at checkout. In conclusion, sleep good, and Manta Sleep is good for sleep, which is good for you. So please do check them out, but for now it's back to you, Me. It's the same thing that happens with Turtle. Meruem orders Colt to clean his tail, and when Turtle offers a hanky, Meruem plonks his head off as well, because Meruem did not command Turtle to do anything. So again, this was a matter of sheer disobedience. So Meruem doesn't consciously realize it, but this act is an initial complete rejection of humanity. The very first thing he did in this world was declare war against the concept of humanity. He didn't stop to consider what value Peggy may have been able to add to his colony. He didn't stop to ask why Peggy was acting this way. He didn't even stop to show concern for his dying ant mother, because none of that is relevant. What's relevant right now is that Meruem, the king, is hungry. He is a creature, and that base need overrode everything. This is Meruem at his most ant, and the killing of Peggy is an act that I suspect endgame Meruem would come to regret, because killing Peggy was the first domino that would fall, eventually leading to the collapse of his entire empire. There's a marked difference in the reaction to Meruem's birth between the squadron leaders and the royal guard, the latter group having already anticipated the king's needs and having already prepared a feast ready to go. And the three of them, they greet the king with smiles and the promise that, "Your wish is our command. We will be at your beck and call to get you anything you need or want." The royal guard are ready and willing to serve the king because their respective struggles with humanity have yet to commence. But if you look at the reaction of the squadron leaders, they do not pledge their allegiance to Meruem willingly. They're not experiencing the joy of serving their king. They're doing so out of the fear for their lives. In fact, in the very same chapter that Meruem was born, Colt surrenders to Nov and Moral. It takes him less than 10 minutes to realize that, mates, this is not the king I want to serve, and then Colt outright states that the king and the royal guard are, quote, evil. And the other squadron leaders are left with a similar thought. For example, Thug Panda states, "The king is totally different from us. He probably thinks of all other creatures as food." Another squadron leader then comments that Meruem's behavior is, quote, sickening, before the most important question comes up, which is, what do they do now? The squadron leaders were united by their mission to protect the Ant Queen, and with Meruem having rendered that pointless, they all suggested that each of the leaders had the potential to become a king of their own, which Nov informs us is a natural instinct of the much smaller and more manageable chimera ant species. Normally, with a queen at the center of a colony, the soldiers will not attempt to breed, though it's been reported that when a queen dies, the soldiers leave the nest and begin mating on their own. So whether he realized this or not, Meruem killing Peggy and allowing his mother to die triggered the chimera ant equivalent of a Vulcan Ponfar, where everyone realized, hey, I've got reproductive organs, so I could just breed my own colony. And to be clear, the path from there consisted of going off to breed with other species. So there could have been some very unfortunate human women, or in the case of Zazan, human men, or, even both. She really did not discriminate where she stuck that girthy love tale, and so they all split up to pursue their own agendas and start their own colonies, which led to incidents like Zazan and her followers commandeering Meteor City. But even the leaders who did stay, like Welfin and Cheetu, did so very much under their own terms. And this created a huge vulnerability within Meruem's colony, which is that, well, it ceased to be a colony. It gave the Hunter Association extermination team the ability to pick off ants in small manageable groups, whereas if they'd kept up that united front, then the extermination team wouldn't have been able to do anywhere near as much damage, or learn anywhere near as much about the ants as they did. Each and every encounter with a chimera ant gave the extermination team valuable information, and just as Peggy said, their ability to learn is their strength. So why are we, the ants, facilitating that learning? It's because we didn't learn that them learning was a bad thing, because we killed a penguin. One of the fun reversals of the chimera ant arc is that to really overcome humans, then you need to deal with them in the same way that they tried to deal with the ants. You need to get rid of them all in one fell swoop, because every opportunity granted allows humanity to evolve, and humans will find a way to win, no matter how malicious that evolution may be. I'll also say that the betrayal of one squadron leader hit much harder than the rest, and that was Melioron. After the leaders disbanded, Melioron became hell-bent on taking the king's life for the sake of revenge. And this is because Peggy's death triggered a human memory in Melioron, and he remembered that Peggy was actually his foster father, which started Melioron on a dangerous path of unlocking other human memories, emotions, and thought patterns, to the point where Gon even accepted him as a human. You seem very human, more so than any other chimera ant I've met. Actually, I'd say that you're just as human as I am. And given what Gon turns into by the end of this arc, you can take that statement as you will. But this simple act of Meruem killing Peggy has spiraled out of control. It freed all of the squadron leaders from their ant duties, and it pushed them to pursue their most selfish and, dare I say, most human desires. And this all comes back to bite Meruem, especially in the case of Meliaron, because his Nen ability, perfect plan, and God's accomplice were integral to the palace invasion, and quite frankly, I have no idea how the extermination team were planning to succeed without him. The greatest shame here is that we do know what Meruem goes on to become, and he does start to put a focus on trying to understand humanity. He opens that door, as well as goes on to wrestle with the innate humanity within himself, although these avenues are primarily expressed through Komugi and to a lesser extent Isaac Netero. And it really does make me wonder if that journey could have started earlier with Peggy alive as an influence, or at the very least Peggy's human research may have better prepared Meruem and the Royal Guard for the palace invasion. Peggy may have stumbled upon the poor man's rose in some book on human warfare and allowed Meruem to keep that idea in the back of his head rather than get caught in Netero's trap. Or if he'd known about the existence of said weapons of mass destruction, then he could at least ensure that his forces were never gathered all in one convenient location for it to take effect, stuff like that. But as things played out, Meruem realized far too late what humans were capable of due to his initial rejection of them. Meruem had to learn about humans the hard way. Everything he came to know and respect about them had to be experienced firsthand, whether that be Gungi's strategy or having a nuke dropped in his face. And you can argue that keeping Peggy alive wouldn't have changed anything, but I don't think that's true. Meruem was shockingly close to having an army of 5,000 Nen-using Chimera ants hatch, and once that happened, there was nothing humanity could have done to stop them. You can still drop the bomb, but with 5,000 Nen-using ants, someone is going to have a relevant ability to defend against or at least ensure their survival. All Meruem needed was that little extra bit of time, and that time could have been conjured in many different ways. One method could have been dedicating a squad of Chimera ants to studying humanity, and another method would have been to, not throw away your entire colony and have them present a united front. And a particularly good way to buy time would have been to not piss off the ant with a Nen ability that could most help a small hit squad infiltrating the palace. It goes towards one of the many running themes during this arc, which is that the ants were always doomed. Togashi's nihilism was never going to allow them to overcome what he considers to be the greatest evil in this world, which is of course you. I mean, not just you, but actually, yeah, just you, filthy human viewer. From the very moment that Meruem was born, his fate was locked in, and no amount of work he did afterwards could change that. Although we did eventually see some justice for Peggy. In the 2011 anime, there's an original character known only as the World Tree Tour Guide, and he attempts to tell Gon, Killua, and Alucard about the history of the World Tree, but they mostly get distracted and ignore him. However, this guide bears a shocking resemblance to Peggy, and even shares the same voice actor in Japanese. And I honestly have no idea what this is meant to imply, because it's way too similar to be a coincidence, and I guess this is potentially a relative of the human who became Peggy, but it's probably something much more wanky and esoteric. The idea being that this concept of humanity that Meruem tried to wipe out from the very get-go will always manage to survive. And while they may have the potential for infinite evolution, the peak human body will always present itself as a short penguin-looking dude. You cannot kill Peggy because Peggy is an idea. And I guess someone should tell Meliaron, because he'd probably shit his chameleon pants if he ever took a tour of the World Tree.